They told you John Cena was the locker room leader, the hard worker who lifted everyone. They plastered hustle, loyalty, respect on t-shirts and told you Cena made stars. The truth is, rawer, darker, and uglier, Cena's power protected him, and when that protection was threatened, careers were quietly killed. This is not rumor-monger gossip. This is a pattern moments, where talent went off script, where control was challenged, and the response was swift, brutal, and effective. This is the Cenation Blackball, wrestlers who stepped out of line with Cena and paid the price. Hit subscribe to AlphaWar Room now because you're about to hear things they'd rather the public forget. Alex Riley's story is the opening bell. He arrived as a promising right-hand man to The Miz, a natural heel who could flip to a babyface and carry TV time. He had chemistry, crowd heat, and the look of someone who could climb. The turning point was a backstage fallout with Cena, a confrontation Riley later admitted happened, apologized for, and still felt haunted by as his trajectory stalled. Riley says he and Cena argued, that he tried to make amends, and that the push he'd been riding evaporated soon after. It's not just Riley's word. Multiple outlets documented the tension, and Riley himself has spoken on podcasts and interviews about how the backstage relationship with Cena soured and how his main event future dried up afterward. This wasn't a slow fade from creative indifference. It was a sudden redirect away from the spotlight that followed their clash. Riley's fall was instructive because it set a precedent. When you cross Cena, momentum can vanish overnight. But you don't need to take Riley's word to see the pattern. Look at Nexus, the revolution that arrived like a bomb in 2010 and quickly became the most compelling faction on television. Nexus was designed to be a seismic shock to WWE, to tear down the doors and rebuild the hierarchy. The original plan, according to multiple insiders and participants, was to crown Nexus as a legitimate threat by giving them a decisive SummerSlam victory that would have cemented their momentum. Then the finish changed. Reports from those in the room, including members of Nexus and other veterans who spoke afterward, indicate Cena pushed for the protection of his brand, insisting the match end in a way that preserved the company's top stars. The result? Nexus lost the punch they needed. Their credibility was hollowed out in a single night. This wasn't just a booking tweak. It was a career-changing decision with consequences that echoed through those wrestlers' resumes. The mechanics of this power weren't always public. Cena didn't have to sign someone's release or write their contract. He had influence in rooms where decisions were made, and sometimes that influence looked like veto power. He could argue, he could lobby, he could insist. When he did, matches changed, pushes stalled, and TV time evaporated for those who'd opposed him. Careers aren't ended by a single match, they're crushed by an accumulation of denied opportunities, pulled strings, and deliberate omissions. That's the quiet blackball. Carlito's example shows how quickly an unscripted moment can become a life sentence. He'd been a charismatic main roster presence, a guy with a quick wit and a lethal reaction to the live crowd. But the locker room is a culture, and Carlito reportedly pushed boundaries that Cena treated as lines not to be crossed. In interviews, and in later tell-alls, Carlito described a volatile backstage incident, what one source called a drunken fistfight, where tempers flared and Cena confronted him over commitment and attitude. The narrative afterward is consistent. Carlito's push cooled, creative sidelined him repeatedly, and the momentum he once had dissolved. The lessons seem to be perfectly clear to those watching. Challenge the standard bearer, and your path forward becomes a minefield. Kenny Dykstra's story is another painful page. A member of the Spirit Squad with raw charisma and youth on his side, Dykstra, Ken, has publicly claimed that his relationship and backstage friction, widely reported and never fully smoothed over with Cena, contributed to the rapid dimming of his WWE prospects. Dykstra's accounts, repeated over years in interviews, carry a consistent through line. He felt frozen out, creatively sidelined, and ultimately released because the backstage climate had turned against him. Whether the cause was personal or professional, the effect was the same. Talent lost opportunities, and Cena's orbit protected itself by keeping certain people at bay. You can argue motive. Some say it's pettiness. Others say it's protection of the company's brand, but the outcomes are objective. Careers that had forward motion encountered abrupt stoppages after incidents involving Cena. The pattern repeated enough that insiders began to view Cena not only as the face of WWE, but as a gatekeeper with the power to cut lights on careers. That is the definition of a blackball. This all culminates in Cena's own words, a rare and candid public admission that shed light on the temperament behind his decision-making. On Raw, Cena famously said, "I don't bury talent, I bury mediocrity." He framed it as a standard of excellence. If you were exceptional, you would be protected. If you were mediocre, you would be buried. It's a line that sounds defensible until you realize how subjective mediocrity can be, and how it can be applied to anyone who rubs a powerful man the wrong way. That statement wasn't a defensive quip, it was a thesis for action. It tells you how he rationalized influence, not as personal punishment, but as quality control. The problem is that quality in wrestling is a narrative, not an objective measurement, and that's where the damage happens. People in the business talk about unwritten rules. You don't embarrass the top star, you don't steal the show, you don't go off script in a way that exposes creative. Those rules exist to keep television coherent, but they also exist to protect stars from mistakes. The Cenation Blackball shows how those rules can be weaponized, when enforcement comes not from neutral management, but from the star himself. Impartiality is gone. You don't just lose a match. You lose narratives, phone calls, meetings, and momentum. You are slowly erased. The examples don't stop with the names we all know. Heath Slater and other Nexus members later spoke about the fallout from that SummerSlam night, how the change in finish rippled through weekly TV and PPV booking, turning a potential history-making storyline into a demotion for a new generation. Those men carried scars beyond the ring, reputational, financial, and psychological. The machine forgives errors, but it never forgets when power consolidates and uses that power to protect itself. This is where the moral line gets blurry. On one hand, the argument for Cena's influence is framed as stewardship. He was the company's top draw, the man who sold merchandise, who did charity work, who brought eyes and dollars. Protecting that asset, from a business standpoint, makes cold sense. But stewardship becomes authoritarian when it weaponizes personal vendettas or when it is used to suppress legitimate competition rather than guard brand value. The line between protecting a brand and strangling careers is not theoretical, it's practical and measurable. The Cenation Blackball is where that line was crossed. Consider the human costs. Alex Riley left a career with momentum and later spent years outside the spotlight, working commentary and independent dates while burned memories of his WWE run lingered. Carlito spent years bouncing between indie bookings and short stints on TV, never quite recapturing the trajectory he once had. Dykstra's post-WWE life was marked by bitterness and missed opportunities. They are not cautionary tales in a vacuum. They are a map of what happens when control over storytelling becomes control over livelihood. You might ask, did Cena act alone? Of course not. Wrestling is a complex ecosystem. Creative decisions involve writers, producers, and executives, but influence is influence. When the biggest star uses his clout in a creative room, when his preferences shape outcomes, the entire apparatus tips in his direction. The result is the same whether a finish is changed in a meeting because of Vince McMahon, a head writer, or because Cena didn't want to lose. The human effect is identical. Credibility is lost, momentum dies, and opportunities narrow. There are defenders of Cena's approach who argue that he saved many careers by mentoring and putting over talent when it counted. He's right, in part. Cena gave countless debuts and moments to young stars. But that doesn't erase the other side of the ledger. Influence is a double-edged sword. It builds and it burns. The Cenation Blackball is proof of the burn. Look deeper and you see how systemic this becomes. When TV time is currency, and someone controls access to that currency, they control futures. When a star can quietly lobby creative to alter angles, to reduce someone's mic time, or to shift a TV segment away from a challenger, that star wields power equivalent to decision makers. Wrestling is unique because the performers are partly the storytellers, but that shared creative role only works when it's collaborative, not coercive. The Cenation era was collaborative at the top and coercive at the margins. Then there is the PR spin. Publicly, WWE celebrates work rate and storytelling. Backstage, it often protects its investments. The public narrative of Cena as mentor is appealing, the good guy who teaches the next generation to hustle. But inside that story sits a different truth. The business preferences certainty and risk aversion, and sometimes the way to secure that certainty is to silence anyone who threatens it. The Cenation Blackball wasn't built in a single night. It was constructed through repeated choices, phone calls, and subtle pressures that added up to crushing momentum. And make no mistake, the damage is measurable. When Nexus was denied the win they were promised, ratings dipped for the storyline, and the group's merchandising potential collapsed. When Riley's push collapsed, the company lost a potential top mid-card star who could have diversified Cena's own workload. When Carlito's heat cooled, a skilled performer disappeared from main event consideration. These aren't abstract thoughts, they are business losses disguised as creative choices. The blackball doesn't just hurt wrestlers, it erodes the company's creative inventory. So why does this matter now? Because power imbalances repeat. History teaches that when one star gains disproportionate influence, the room becomes less creative and more cautious. New talent gets funneled, recycled, or sidelined to avoid conflict. That's not how long-term brands are built. Brands grow when risk is embraced, when challengers are allowed to rise, and when stars are willing to be risked in service of the story. The Cenation Blackball removed that risk calculus. It replaced it with protectionism. There's also a cultural element. Wrestling is deeply performative, and locker room ethos matters. When the culture tacitly endorses a star's power to punish younger talent, internalize lessons that distort their behavior. Keep quiet, don't challenge, don't innovate too boldly. That breeds conformity rather than creativity. It turns art into maintenance. Some of the most electrifying moments in wrestling come from creative friction, not conformity. The Cenation era favored the latter. This isn't a call to cancel John Cena, it's a call to understand the real cost of power used to protect itself. It's a plea to value transparency and fairness in creative rooms. Legends are built on great matches, but legacies are tested by how stars treat the people who follow them. If legends are responsible for ensuring that the next generation has a shot, truly a shot, then the Cenation Blackball is a stain on what could otherwise be an admirable legacy. What would change the dynamic? Structural safeguards. Clearer delineation between star input and creative finality. Processes that ensure decisions are made on merit and not emotion. And a culture that rewards risk and growth rather than punishing challenge. Those aren't romantic ideals. They are practical solutions to a recurring problem that depresses creative potential. The stories of Alex Riley, Nexus, Carlito, and Kenny Dykstra are not isolated anecdotes. They are data points in a pattern where power was used to protect power and where careers were casualties of an internal code that rewarded conformity and punished deviation. The Cenation Blackball is a phrase that describes this reality, and it's time we take it seriously. Not to vilify an icon, but to recognize the human cost of unchecked influence. In wrestling, heroes fall, and rises happen in the ring. But the worst thing is when a star falls not because of a story, not because of a bad match, but because of a choice made in a meeting, a whispered word, a veto, or a grudge. That is the Cenation Blackball, and until the industry confronts it, it will keep repeating quietly, inexorably, and with real lives on the line. If you want to know who benefits from silence in the locker room, look at who controls the storylines. If you want to know who pays the price for speaking up, look at the careers that stalled after they crossed a star. The Cenation Blackball didn't invent power. It simply showed how old power protects itself, even at the expense of the next generation. The question for fans, creators, and executives is simple. Are we going to accept that, or are we going to demand accountability and space for the next wave to truly rise?
Lay the smackdown on that subscribe button.
Like I'm Jason, I see the world like it's ready for the taking. I see this place like a game.